Welcome to the Sanctum Secorum podcast, where we plumb the depths of Appendix N as it pertains to the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game. We are here to help you serve these literary offerings at your DCC RPG table. I am Keeper of Mysteries Bob. With me, as always, is Keeper Mark.
Hello, everyone.
And Keeper Jen.
Hello.
Tonight, we are discussing a book that was reviewed by Thrilling Wonder Stories as Space Opera with a Vengeance. Tonight, The Legion of Space by Jack Williamson. Tell us about it, Jen.
The Legion is the military and police force of the solar system. It was created to keep the peace after the overthrow of the Purples, a dynasty that ruled all humanity for generations. John Ulner, a young graduate of the Legion Academy, shares a surname with the Purples, but is an enthusiastic supporter of the Legion. Through the machinations of his uncle, a powerful politician with a hidden agenda, John Ulner is assigned to a guard force at a secret fort on Mars. When their protectee is kidnapped by a huge alien spaceship, John and the three other survivors of the guard force follow her kidnappers to a planet of Barnard's star. They crash land and must battle their way across a savage continent to the sole remaining citadel of the foul Medusa. Is that Medusa or Medusae? Because it's like the AE, the conjoined AE pluralized.
Might be Medusae? I'm not sure.
I think Medusae is what I was reading in my mind. Yeah.
We'll go with it.
Oh my God. This is just absolutely fantastic. Jack Williamson, man. The dean of science fiction.
This is your pick, right, Bob?
Yes, it is, and I'm really excited about it. Jack Williamson himself, I think, is someone that we've never covered on the show before.
Okay.
And this guy wrote until well into his 90s. He was born in 1908, died in 2006.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a guy that wrote about rocket ships, and yet when he was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, his family moved from Texas to New Mexico in a horse-pulled covered wagon.
In
1915.
Not 1815.
Nope, 1915. Okay. He published his first story in like 1928, and he was just really well known in the community. To put it into perspective, when teenaged Isaac Asimov published his first story, Jack Williamson wrote him a letter and welcomed him to the community. He had a newspaper strip for 3 years. He was credited with one of the first uses of the term genetic engineering. And he coined two terms that we should all be fairly familiar with: terraforming, and for you gamers, psionics. That's where the term comes from, is Jack Williamson.
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually really neat to read this book and recognize that it was written in basically the 1930s, because it was serialized in Amazing Stories, I think, back then, and then published in book form in 1948.
It was published, I think, in 47 or 48. Yeah, but it had been serialized over 6 parts. You can kind of tell it was serialized, right?
Yeah, but I think it was like well over a decade before, and just putting that perspective, like you said, this is well before the space age. This is, before even, if it's the 30s when he was writing this in a serialized form, it's before, any of the rocketing that, engineering that was going on in World War II and post-World War II. It's pretty amazing. And, it has a realism to the scientific, components that I found I love that stuff, right? Like he describes Barnard's star, this runaway star. And there is, it was a known star at the time, but, it actually has the largest proper motion of any star in the sky, because it's proximate to our solar system, but also it has a huge velocity. And the way he explains that in the novel is that the Medusae are the ones that are propelling it, right? That they've created sort of like artificial, science behind it. And I love those little things that he's like meshing, this thing that they, obviously is, kind of discovered at the time, but they want to mesh it with a science fiction story, and that those little details are what really, really made it a nice read for me.
I think the thing that struck me the most, and I actually had to dig in and research this. So there was a Polish author, Heinrich Sienkiewicz, who released a novel in 1884 called Fire and Sword. And for Fire and Sword, he took essentially the characters of the Three Musketeers and Shakespeare's Falstaff and renamed them and dropped them in for his story. And Jack Williamson attended a seminar and they discussed that, and he thought it was brilliant. And it shows, because I was reading this going, this is the Three Musketeers in space. And it is, and it was intentional. I mean, our protagonist, John Ulner, is obviously D'Artagnan. Jay Callum is certainly Aramis, kind of withdrawn and cerebral. Giles Habibule is definitely our Athos Falstaff, kind of larger than life but always complaining character, and Hal Samdu is certainly Porthos. I mean, you can break this down. You can see the Musketeers and the connection, and it made it so much fun. I think in my notes I called this a ripping yarn of high adventure and space opera.
Now, we can disagree or agree on Giles versus Giles. Screw your gifts. But is it just me, or did Giles speak a lot like Ningobble? Just where one or two words would have done, we get pages of something.
Well, that's true, because it was always sort of this woe is me monologue.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing was really wrong, but and he would always hint at, and why I was driven from Venus. And they're like, why were you driven from Venus again? But enough of that. Yeah. And it would just, his litany of wrongs that he had suffered would get longer as the story progressed, because he just kept building on it.
Yeah, it was a little bit like, what is this character going to be like at first? But it really grew on me, because he is a funny, character. He's very able, right? That's the one thing that, Falstaff is also this sort of like, comic character, but also, an old soldier and these things. But Giles, when it's pressed, he becomes the person who, rescues them in a couple of instances, pretty key instances, with the lockpicking and the engine repair, all these things that he's complaining about, but he's also, very much skilled when it's crunch time, I guess.
Yes, very useful and dedicated to it, to the point where he was emaciated after this long voyage from Pluto's moon to the Medusa's planet, the planet by Barnard's star.
Well, and
the dying red sun was not lost on me, by the way.
that's kind of the thing about this book, right? But we have this introduction that essentially takes place in modern day, which, especially to a modern reader, is kind of superfluous. It's, hey, I had these visions. I know how I'm going to die, and it's because I've seen the future, and these things happen in the future, and then he dies. So we introduce a main character. He dies. We never see him again, nor is he ever discussed. But it sort of sets things up a little, right? It tells us that the family went to heights and then became despotic, and
well, it's one of these things we've talked about with some of the recent books. There's this bookend, of this, but there's no bookend to this bookend. It's like I kept expecting there to be like a return to, the present or something like that. But but it does feel very superfluous, like you said. It's just got this sort of like sort of feel of, this is like the beginning of this story. And you never see the Doctor again, which is another character I kind of liked too. And you don't need that. It's something you could launch in the context of modern readership. Just to say, here's a roaring space adventure, rather than the time and place sort of being an introduction. I guess as kind of guidance, for the readers of the time.
But if you really want a bookend, you could just read until he leaves the doctor's office, then read the book, and then go back and finish the introduction where the doctor goes, and then he died.
Right.
So, you can split it up that way.
But I have to say, I actually enjoyed the part where we didn't get inundated by a whole lot of, so I read the next part, and this is what it said. So it left behind a bit of, shall we say, the Princess Bride outside story.
Yeah, this is John Ulner, the good parts, right?
Heavily edited, yeah. Who knows what's real anymore? So.
Well, and
we join them shortly before this entire mission is undertaken, right? And I just have to insert a little footnote that I was really impressed that Catalina Island was still around 1,000 years into the future.
Yeah, the Sandia Mountains in New Mexico and all that, that's still present. But yeah, Catalina Island, it would have sunk by then, maybe.
I mean, not much has changed. Okay.
Yeah.
well, I just like, and again, very Musketeer-like in that we have John Ulner is the fresh-faced recruit that's just come out of training, and then he encounters the three, experienced soldiers, and what's he have to do? Within like 24 hours of landing on Mars, he has to put them all under arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has that potentially confrontational moment with all of them, but everybody just sort of goes with it and doesn't blame him for it. And it really does sort of remind me, especially, I could see the visuals from like the Michael York 1970s Three Musketeers when they're all showing up for their duel, and he's like, "Wait, I'm dueling him right now. Oh no, I'm dueling you now. I'm dueling him in 20 minutes, and then I'm dueling him to the death in 20 more minutes." And so, and they all take it in stride, and it kind of creates their bond. And his arresting them and imprisoning them kind of begins their bond. And I found that just a lot.
Especially the acts in which he has to interrupt them to bring them down to the brig.
Which tells us a lot about their characters.
Yeah. I have to admit that the first, 40 pages of the book, I was like, I'm not enjoying this. And that's because it's that whole section of John Ulmer by himself, right? It's him being presented as this sort of heroic figure. And I was thinking, this is very tropey, it's just going to be this sort of like, Superman who goes on this and rescues the damsel. But once they actually became a band, right? It was like such a enjoyable, series of events. One chase after another, one calamity they're avoiding after another, and that is the part that just sung for me. And I think partially, you were talking about Three Musketeers and those stories. But what really resonated for me is that this is like one of the books that felt most like an adventuring party, right? Coming together and really going through an adventure versus a lot of the books, in these genres are very much so that solo hero, right? The quest or the one person, they may have ancillary companions or they may have like love interests, but this really felt like a group of characters going through facing difficulties, each with their own sort of skills and classes. If you go that far, and they're not afraid to like, some of them get injured and fall unconscious at times, and it's not like the hero is the only one overcoming all these challenges. Everyone has to pull their weight, and I thought that was just really, really refreshing, but also just it was more compelling, for that 2/3 of the novel that partake. And so, I think it works really well, and definitely, enjoyed the read after everybody got together and started going on the quest to save. Is it Aladori? I think.
Aladori, yeah.
Aladori, yeah.
To your point, Mark, I really appreciated how they were all in it together. Nobody, took quote unquote rank. John and Jay were addressing each other as captain. And
well, there's also one of the things that there's that hesitation moment, or in the reader's perspective, like, oh, John's going to be the captain of this ship, and it's like, no, Jay is. He's the analytical one. He's the one who plans, right? And he's the natural one, and so that was kind of nice that it sort of didn't fulfill the expectations I was sort of carrying into the book. But yeah, it was. I thought it was a lot of fun.
And they all took some penalties for being completely exhausted at points because nobody got a nap.
Well, and parts of the story, I think, still really resonate well today in the fact that John Ulner's family lineage comes from not only the people that were like the first explorers through the galaxy, but also those that formed a tyrannical, essentially empire, right? And were eventually driven to the point where they had to abdicate. So we're also dealing with this family dynamic of essentially very old, very wealthy family that he's on the outskirts of, and our initial villain is his family plotting the overthrow of the Legion and to overthrow the democratic government. And he is offered that position, right? And when I read that part, I just could not help but think of, join me and we will rule the galaxy as father and son, right? I mean, it's right there. It's, you will be the emperor because my son thinks he's going to be the emperor, but he's an idiot. But you're really good. And he's like, no, I won't do it. I'm thinking, if you just said, yes, I'll do it, and then you could just get all these people arrested, this would have been a much shorter book.
Make a couple of changes in legislature, yeah.
But
honestly, the part that stuck with me the most was the heavy use of color associations. The villain is black. Mm-hmm. The good guys are wearing green. In fact, that purple versus green, the two councils against each other for all of humankind, you have purple, which is royalty, and green, which is based on science. And I'm thinking back to practically every single sci-fi book I've read, every single RPG that I've played, and they all follow the same lines. And so this being so far back, what was it, 1930s-ish? I can kind of see how this would be one of the formative titles in Appendix N.
Well, and when you mentioned color, yeah, there was like one of my favorite monsters was the river creature, and it was covered in hard red armor. The proton gun blasts out blinding violet flame. So there's a lot of color references. And I think that really kind of makes things stick out in your mind a little bit more. And I don't know, it helps kind of set that sweeping space opera tone that I kind of expect, right? It's not just he's firing a laser. It's this brilliant purple flash that's nearly blinding, and it helps you kind of get swept away with it.
The whiteness of that star weapon, right?
Well, and they just get swept away in this entire story, right? I mean, he's assigned to Mars.
Yeah.
And that goes horribly wrong. And then from Mars, they journey to Barnard Star, and that entire voyage is an adventure in itself, right? They stop at Pluto. There's the raid to get supplies. So they have enough fuel to get to Barnard Star. And there's some interesting science there where they sneak magnets onto the ship so they can't take off. And then there's the journey, they crash land on Barnard Star, and they swim through the ocean and they cross through the jungles. There's so much to this.
The red mist or atmosphere encapsulating what's left of this planet, and the yellow water. That was freaky. All the seas were yellow.
Well, and let's talk about how this sort of predates other things that people might be familiar with from science fiction, right? So when the Medusae have decided they're going to attack the Earth, they've got this red gas that they use on their planet, and they've discovered that it's very detrimental to humans. So they start gas bombing all of Earth to destroy all life on Earth. And
after they the moon.
But when they were doing that, I immediately jumped back to one of the first anime programs I ever saw, Star Blazers, where the Gamelons are doing that with radiation bombs, and they're firing these bombs to the planet and driving everyone underground and killing everyone. There's so many things in here that they're familiar, but they're familiar, but they don't feel stolen, right? There's so many times people are introduced to an older piece of fiction. They're like, oh, well, they stole that from this. Well, no. Star Trek was much later than Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. And you don't necessarily get that, but there's similarities, but they're different enough that it's just enjoyable as you recognize it.
And Alidori was not a completely useless female.
No, she was not.
She
Well,
held
and it's interesting.
mankind.
She's described at the very end of the book in almost mystical or religious way, which I was very curious about, just in terms of how her reaction to creating or starting Akka and all that things up, but the way that they have this kind of reverence towards her, and almost how she's a different type of being at some point was interesting. But yeah, she's the first one to jump into the sluice, and like say, okay, follow me. Yeah. Sort of like Princess Leia, opening it and jumping in. So,
and just the whole concept of Akka, right? They're like, yeah, so there's 4 letters, and only she knows what it is, and she will pass that knowledge on to one other person, and that's it. It is the guarded secret, and those letters are kind of the launching point for the technology that she knows and the super science she understands. And that's the other thing, because a lot of times it felt like, oh, this is going to be some sort of mystical thing, and she builds a machine. So, I mean,
paper clips and stuff.
I need metal.
For the lack of a nail, the humankind is lost.
Well, that was brilliant. The starship had no iron, right? Because magnets cause problems. There were so many wonderful little twists and tweaks in there that they were unexpected. They didn't have to be huge things, but the way they described the citadel of the Medusae and its strange geometry, because I mean they're gigantic jellyfish that communicate by radio wave. And so all of their buildings are just sort of haphazard and random. There's doors everywhere. There's no floors. They just sort of drift out.
Because they can levitate and fly, yeah.
Exactly. And so it really kind of set it up as very, very alien.
Yes.
And I appreciated that quite a bit. It is worth noting that this is the first book in the series. So the first book published in 1947, the last one in 1983.
Is there 3 books, or are there more than that?
There's actually 4. There were 3, and they were collected in 3 from Legion.
That's the copy I have, yeah.
And then in 1983, the last book was Queen of the Legion, and it takes place after the downfall of the Legion.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's just there's so much to this world, and I'm definitely going to be reading the rest. I mean, this was just. It was gripping. It was fun. It's Dumas without being derivative of Dumas. It doesn't feel like a space pastiche. It just feels similar enough that I was like, hey, and then it was. It's also worth noting that there is a series of game books, Combat Command, and they had an entry based on the Legion of Space series called The Legion at War, and I want to hunt that down. It was written by Andrew Keith, and Jack Williamson wrote an introduction to it.
Oh, okay.
So Jack Williamson appeared in an RPG book.
I love that.
I loved virtually everything about this. The only thing that I didn't like was I forget his name because I disliked him so much. Our human villain,
Eric, or
the younger. So Eric was
Eric, yeah, Eric Oldendor.
He was just, I don't know. He was just kind of, I thought a little overly slimy.
I think it's also one of those kind of things. Like at the time, I don't know. The description of him is very like he's being sort of coded as effeminate, and these things which. It's kind of playing into that, which is you read that and it's like, well, is he really trying to like play that up, or is it just something that he's using based on a villain from like a Dumas story or something. But it's you read that, it's like, he's not really putting a lot of effort into making that character fully realized, right? I think he's just kind of slimy and not.
Well, he's definitely. I mean, he's definitely not likable, and he's almost mustache twirlingly evil,
Yeah.
except that he's not competent enough to tie someone to the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
Right. He's vile. He's cowardly, and so when we got to our grand villains, I much more appreciated that, because I mean, I suppose the sign of a good villain is that you want to just reach through the book and punch him in the face, but it's not the sign of a good villain that I, at my age, think that I could reach through the book, punch him in the face, and take him, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure I could have. But yeah, it was just loads of fun. And so let's get to the fun. Let's talk about
before we leave this part, because I just want to highlight, one of the things I really found enjoyable about this is, we talked about how he's using these great kind of descriptions. I think he's really evocative of this language, but he's really good at tension building as well. There's so many times in the book where he's just a thrilling sort of like, what's going to happen next, and I think that's a really fun element of this. If it kind of feeds into the whole, space opera rip-roaring adventure. But, there's so many like, white knuckle, how are they going to get out of this? And it's usually Jay coming up with, well, we can do this, or John being daring and doing something. And I really think he handles that aspect really well. And certainly makes me want to read the rest of the series just for that.
And it's not always just one of them coming up with a solution.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really nice.
Him asking the Porthos-esque guy to be, hey, throw me.
That was great.
Mark, you bring up a really good point, because I usually try to include a little caveat of how approachable the Appendix N work is, especially ever since we did the Dying Earth stuff with the Vance estate. We all know that Dying Earth is a little bit tough for some people to get into. If anyone has any qualms about reading this particular book because of its age, or because of the fact that it's in Appendix N, you think it might not be your thing or accessible, let me just tell you, there was like one word that I went, I haven't seen that one in a while, and moved on. It was not one of those where you're hitting the weird word usage like every paragraph.
It's how approachable when we get to Mark's word of the day, right?
It's not. I mean, it's not overly wordy for the sake of being wordy. It's not overly descriptive. It's just enough to immerse you.
I think it's a pretty fast read too. It really is. I mean, you get going. You don't want to put it down, and you just fly through.
And I got through it in 2 settings. I was pretty impressed. Okay, now we can go on to stats. That's kind of like Mark's word of the day. I try to make a little accessibility assessment.
So, Mark, what things would you want to bring to the table from this book?
Oh gosh, this is another one of those books that has such a number of monsters that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I know all of us probably had, ones that we wanted to kind of stat up or create. Bob, you'll cover the Medusae, but they're clearly like a great, alien race that, just is screaming for statting up and using in some context for DCC. But, the thing that Jen, you alluded to this earlier, but their ships are just as interesting. They have these kind of like, cat and mouse type games with, the Legion ship, and eventually they're like, okay, it's time to destroy them. They shoot out this ball of energy, which they describe as like an atomic sun, or some of the atomic vortices, I think is the term they use, but it's almost like a miniature sun that starts sucking the ship towards it. And it kind of just really strange weaponry like that has this science behind it. I really like that, and I think just the Medusae ships would be just kind of fun to create an analog for that in the DCC RPG world. There's a tentacle.
You mean creepy?
Yeah, creepy. Yeah. There's a tentacle creature they encounter in the forest that latches onto Jay's neck and starts sucking, but it also yanks him off the ground and pulls him up into the air. And then when John goes to rescue him and starts cutting through the flesh of this tentacle, he starts seeing human blood going through it and just realizing that that's coming from Jay and it's being sucked into whatever entity this is that you never see.
And talking about tension, I was so sure that Jay was going to die in that scene.
So many times I thought Jay was going to die. And I just yeah, but it's also one of these things in the background. You're always thinking, well, the Three Musketeers, they wouldn't, they can't ever die, right?
Until you get into the
right.
mask.
There's the dragonfly-like creature that another sort of the color description. They have sapphire wings that are kind of iridescent, and they have these scorpion tails and talons that embed everything on this world. Basically, is deadly. This is worth creating a monster for. I love that one. I thought the red gas would be such a nice element to have as an environment for a setting. It not only causes difficulty with breathing, which you can kind of think of as terms of like stamina penalties and things like that, but over time it actually has these kind of bigger effects, like driving people mad or mutating them into weird creatures that they encounter at the end, almost like mutants of the wasteland when they get back to Earth. And then it also, like when it touches you, it slowly turns your skin this sort of scaly green that they have to figure a way to apply an ointment that over time can nullify that. I love that sort of like just this is something that the PCs have to struggle through, and maybe they don't come away with it unchanged with some side effect or corruption. I have a lot here, so for me to just,
I'm digging it.
with the belt of peril that they have to go through for the planet.
Oh yeah,
a great concept. And the way it's described in the book is just so intriguing because it's almost like they're watching each other disintegrate before their very eyes and turning into ghost-like apparitions that can barely sort of talk, and and they just barely make it through. Another very high tension moment. But I could imagine a spell that has this sort of maybe it's a warding spell or some type of like barrier you create that has different levels of results. But one of them is sort of this, if you can't push through, you start, your molecules start spreading out and disintegrating. And, I think that would be kind of a cool way of interpreting that for.
Well, as they were becoming transparent, and they're getting weaker and weaker, and he's forgetting what he needs to do. And he's like, wait, no, there's something I need to do. Oh, I need to push these buttons.
I need to fire the rockets. But I love that section, and the only way they make it through is just by adrenaline and speed, right? They just are punching through it as quickly as possible, and that was a fun moment in the book. Akka itself, what is this thing, and it's very surprising. It was very surprising at the end of the movie or at the end of the book what it actually did. It was like this sort of like, oh wow, yeah, okay, now I can understand why this is such a secret and why everybody's after it, because of the effects it has. And this idea that maybe the PCs have to find some very common thing that they're in a place where they can't locate it, right? They're on maybe they're on the purple planet, and they need something from their world, which is in order to save themselves, or create something like a spell component that normally is very easy to find, but it suddenly becomes harder because they don't have access to those things. So that's a nice idea that judges can use to kind of play around with. But I love that idea that they're just missing this one piece of iron, and they can't rescue humanity. It's on that scale, that grand. It's very, very DCC in that sense. Like you're battling with gods right away. In this case, you're battling to save humanity, right away. And one thing you need is a nail.
And I love how that was told in the story, too, because they're like, oh, we need a piece of iron. I'm like, oh, well, that's going to be easy. They're going to go back to the ship and, like, grab a paper clip or something, right? I mean, they're going to be fine. But we don't have magnetic metals on the ships because magnetic storms would tear us apart. I'm like, this is going to be difficult. And so then they're on the ruins of Earth.
Looking for something. And it is kind of those things. It's a funny sort of like, oh, I found a toy, with a little engine made of iron, and, we can use that. The other things that are not stats exactly, but I think are just inspirations that it came away from, the idea that you could have the PCs trying to escape someplace in complete darkness, not just, low level light, things like that, but they don't have any torches, they don't have anything, and they have to feel their way through everything. That happens, a couple times in the book where they're trying to escape through the vents and they're trying to escape through the waterway, and the slough, and just how frightening that felt in the book, and how I would love to be able to evoke that at the table. So just that idea of thematically using that as a way of saying you can't see anything, you don't know where you're going, you can maybe hear sounds, you can and have to figure out exactly which way to go, and Jay coming up with, well, we have to head towards the wind because that's where the fans are going to be, because that's the vent shaft we're in. There's kind of clever things that players have to come up with to compensate for their lack of knowledge from the environment. The idea that they arrive on the planet and the first thing they do is lose all their equipment, and they're swimming naked and they have to like go to the shore. Of course they find it relatively soon after that, but there's like an encounter they have with that amoeba, creature with these fin-like creatures, and it's just very frightening. They the Legion, I guess, is very much like, we can do it in clothes or no clothes, right? They're very like game, except for Giles maybe, but that idea is very much like a DCC thing, like the Madhouse Meet, is one of those that you start in prison, right? All your stuff is gone. What are you going to do? And I love that idea of like,
I was just going to say, this feels like a funnel.
It's worse though, right? Because they escape with their stuff, they swim to the surface, they lose their stuff, they find their stuff, and almost all their stuff is ruined.
It's all ruined.
You're like, oh, look at we've got our guns. Oh, but they've been in the water too long. Well, I've got this sharp shell.
Well,
it's very much a funnel.
And a bottle of wine. Very important.
Oh, I'm definitely going to talk about a bottle of wine.
Oh, that bottle of wine is an NPC.
The other thing that that was kind of neat was we talked about the bookend, the forward being this sort of like remembered story, and my takeaway from that is that while it's not really useful for the book very much, there is some benefit, for judges using this as a technique in their role-playing games, where the PCs are able to go to a different place in time through some event, right? Whether it's magical or it's like this triggered memory. And I was thinking in terms of the Call of Cthulhu adventure, Horror on the Orient Express, where several times they have these sort of flashback adventures that are meant to be sort of precursors to the main adventure, but the way that you play them is that basically your characters, your players are replaced. Their characters are replaced with the older, whatever it is, Roman Invictus or the Gaslight era. And you kind of get a new chance to sort of inject a different scenario and scenery and themes and time, and sort of that remembered sort of trope is, I think, really useful in a judge's role playing sense, even if it's not as useful in the narrative sense. Making your worlds more realistic in terms of alienness. I think that's one thing that obviously like the Purple Planet and those kind of adventures do really great at. But throughout the adventure, there's always kind of like strange things they encounter, like a sun that doesn't, it has a cycle that's very different than ours. It stays in the daylight for weeks, and nighttime also is weeks, and it's freezing. The grass, as a result, or the vegetation, dies off at night, but then it grows rapidly again, almost supernaturally rapidly, is what I was envisioning. And so you can make it kind of these environmental choices that really sort of emphasize the alien world, rather than just saying, oh, you're on an alien world and it's a class M planet and you can breathe, and just sort of like leaving it at that. You really want to try and imbue it with some sense of descriptive elements that Jack Williamson does really well in this book. And then the last thing I noted here is, Bob, was that the magnetic traps. I thought that was great in the book, where their ship can't lift off. He has to go and blow up these dynamos that are down there that are generating this. But magnetic traps in a fantasy setting, that your armor is suddenly against you for its benefits. You're stuck to the floor or the ceiling or whatever it is. Those are I love that kind of thing, and I think that's something that think outside the box when it comes to traps. And obviously Grimtooth has a lot of inspiration there, but yeah. So just I love that trap, and I love that the idea that you could just apply it in a fantasy setting to make it intriguing and effective for the players. So,
man, between you and Tim,
well, that was a lot, but
those tournament traps are gonna be deadly.
What about you, Jen?
No, start with you, Bob.
No, go ahead.
You've got a better list. I really liked the colossal amoebas and just the way they were described as they were attacking. in the water.
Well, they're very slow and sort of like, methodical
Yeah.
and creeping across. I like that. Yeah.
I like it. It's closer, yet it hasn't moved.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're on a log in the water. They found a little bit of respite for a breather. This lump of something just starts slowly inching over. So about half an hour later, it's halfway across the log.
And they're like, okay, we'll roll the log, but there's something deadly in the river they're trying to avoid. So like, we'll roll the log, and then we'll run to the other side. It'll come up, and then it'll have to come back this way. And they're risking their lives to roll the log and run to the other side and make the thing come slowly back at them. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
There was a 7-eyed, elephant-sized serpent with red scales. That was the one in the water. That it just, or I can't even, like, I'm trying to picture this. The 7 eyes were kind of in a cluster or a crown on its head. It strikes me as something that would be so not even fantastical, but just kind of bizarre. So yeah, something like Purple Planet or an absolute alien setting would be great for this. Around the beginning, one of the first shall we say, quote unquote, survivors from the run to Barnard's star had come away with madness, as well as someone else had the Venusian jungle fever. And something about that just lends itself to be statted. I love things like long-term effects when characters are adventuring. It's great that you're tired and you're down an action die or something. You're down to a D16 on your actions.
But here, let me make you miserable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun for the short term, but what kind of effects do you get from the jungle fever? Is it like corruption, or is it completely unknown? And the rigidly thorned jungle just really caught my imagination as well, as they're trying to run through this with no clothes, mind you, and it just trying to run through this maze of jungle greenery, and the thorns are thick enough to attach to a spear and call it a better than a pointy stick weapon. So it's I don't know, something about the fact that they weren't bending and they weren't actively attacking kind of made the vine horrors look a little bit tame. Just
fair. Yeah, I want to say, in fairness to all the comments about them going across the planet naked, they did find their clothes in the water. They were dressed in their spacesuits, and then they're just ripped away, which is, I thought, a brilliant way that they showed kind of the passage of time, because they were there for 2 planet days at least. So they were there for
like a month.
A month or more.
I think it was even longer than that in terms of
they were going like 1,000 miles or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
The nights were like a week in their time, and yeah.
So the things that struck me, first of all, I thought that if you're going to do like a space opera style game, you could have a militant, or like a warrior's militant order, which would be the Space Legion. You could write up information for that. The proton gun, again, that blinding violet flame, but also the fact that you could shoot somebody with it, or you could hold the trigger and discharge the entire thing. And when we see that happen, not only does it kill 5 people, it destroys all of their gear and everything else. And that's something that kind of gets left out generally in games with energy weapons. Yeah, I hit him with a plasma cannon. All right, let's go see what he has. Well, he has a steaming pile of molten metal and plastic.
And they don't describe it as a full gun with like a holster and trigger. They're needles.
Well, they had the needlers as well. There's the
Oh,
needlers
those are
and the
so-
proton guns. And I thought the
Okay.
needlers were kind of cool as well because of that, because they're not kind of the traditional gigantic, bulbous
Yeah.
space gun, right?
Yeah.
Like Jen, I really dug the river creature, thick as an elephant, covered in hard red armor. But what I really liked about it the most is it had this long black tongue with hooked, cruel spikes. And so one of its attacks was literally just trying to lick and catch someone on those hooks to drag them in. And that is
That's so
terrifying imagery.
So wrong.
I mean, just a giant monster licking you can be terrifying enough, but you throw on those giant barbs like a cat's tongue to the nth degree, and it gets really ugly. The bottle of wine. Let's talk about the bottle of wine. The bottle of wine, as Jen said, is kind of a character of itself. Giles has his bottle of wine, and they're like, okay, it survived the crash. It's made it to the shore. Well, let's drink it. Well, we can't drink it now. It's the last bottle of wine on this planet. We're going to save it for a special occasion. And I mean, he's constantly trying to save that bottle of wine. It's glass. It's fragile. And he's making all this effort to save it. And then eventually it's lost in a time of crisis. I thought in game terms, it would be really interesting to have something like the bottle of wine, something that's inconvenient and fragile, and make it a one-time luck talisman that can be used in a time of great need. I'm 100 feet underwater. I'm trying to make it to the surface. Okay, well, I drop the bottle. You make your stamina check. You clear the surface. I thought something like that could be a lot of fun, especially since it's not just I have this ring that gives me a luck bonus or a ring that's a one-time luck bonus. No, it's sort of like when I was in high school and I'd see students that were taking the parenting class, walking around with their egg that they had to keep alive, right? I mean, it's inconvenient and fragile. And
that is very much so.
And that really, really sold it for me. And then, yeah, the Medusae, these giant evil space jellyfish that are they're so alien.
And when they're first seen, it's just this eyeball against the window, and then it retracts.
Yeah, because the tentacles can have eyes.
Yeah.
And then it's
That was also
the fact that they communicate by radio transmissions, and so they're interrogating people. So they've got a human who can torture that person who has a rudimentary understanding of how to communicate with them. So he can then make noises into this radio that they will then be able to understand. So there's never really this solid direct communication. There's that separation that makes them more alien and more strange.
Can I add one to my list? Because you just reminded me of something crucial in interactions like this.
Go right ahead.
The inability to understand each other. There was no comprehend languages. There was no ring or pendant of communication. You just didn't know. And that kind of came into a good point when they wanted Aladari? Question. They made the weak a weak one go in and question her, and then they were torturing him when he wasn't getting the right answers. But they didn't know if he actually was getting any answers or not. And so it kind of made me think, for the plot line, it made me think, is he actually kind of sort of helping? Who knows?
As it turned out, no, he wasn't.
Yeah, it turned out no.
But yeah, it's something I think that judges overlook sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, that not all monsters or NPCs or characters of any type, not all the characters in a story are going to be understood by you. you might make a gesture that to them is completely offensive. Like, hey, do you need food? Well, that might mean something completely different to them. And I think exploring the linguistic variations on that could be really fun.
Well, and getting back to the Medusae, the thing about them is certainly from the human standpoint, they're monstrous and evil. But from their standpoint, they're doing what they need to do to save this portion of their race, right? I mean, they've spread out amongst the stars, but this is their home world and it's dying, and they need to go, or they're all going to die. And they've developed in these incredibly harsh conditions, almost Black Sun death crawl conditions, and they've survived this far. So it's like, well, it's you or us, and we've decided that it's going to be you that goes. So there's reasoning behind them, which in a lot of ways I think makes them more chilling, because while you can't really wrap your head around them as like a species, you can understand their motivations. They're just not nice about it because they're from a dying world and they don't have time for that. And they're cruel and efficient. I think they're a great example.
For a while.
Well, I think they're a great example of how evil a lawful creature can be.
Yeah, that's true.
So yes, I absolutely loved them. I loved them a lot. So let's talk about some props and audio, or audio and baby props.
We always go light on the props these days, but I've been trying to like work more of them in.
Yeah, you don't want.
My only idea for a prop, and honestly, that's out of the way right now, was I kept thinking about, fog machines and how you can have a fog machine going in your players table and have some red lights and just be like, here's my atmosphere, enjoy. That was my one throwaway prop for the game.
I will say, if you're going to use a fog machine in close quarters, get a me fogger that runs on water. That fog juice. Man,
oh yeah.
That stuff's. I worked at a place where we used to lay that stuff down thick and heavy, and then one day I was responsible for unpacking the new box. I'm like, why does it say here that if I spill it, I need to call a hazardous material response team?
But see, Bob, that's more realistic to the red gas.
Well, that's true. That's
right,
yeah,
so...
okay. Cancer's realistic. That's fair.
Long-term effects. We just want to get it, get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I think there's a lot that you can do with just, like we talked about, some of the, evoking the darkness and those kind of, crawls and having the long-term effects. But yeah, I couldn't really think of it more props than that just came to mind, because some of it's just that, the narrative is so strong here that, I didn't think the props were necessary. So
that's fair. What about you, Jen?
For props?
Props or audio?
No, you don't want my audio recommendations. I was listening to like bluegrass while I was reading this, so no.
You're right. I mean, if the grass was really bright blue, maybe.
I was listening to a lot of the Hans Zimmer Dune soundtracks while I was reading the books, and it's just because I don't think that was necessarily me trying to find a space, but it was space themey, and it's just that's been on my mind the last couple of weeks. So it was appropriate if people want to check those out. I'm sure it'll put them in the mood for some space adventures.
Exactly.
What about you, Bob? All right.
Yeah.
I planned. So I'm gonna warn you now that the Spotify playlist for this show is about 9 hours of music.
Wow.
I really dove in. I really wanted to kind of capture the space opera feel, and I think I captured it in two different ways. And I mostly just drew. I think I entirely drew on soundtracks. James Horner and David Newman's Battle Beyond the Stars soundtrack, which is essentially the Magnificent Seven in space. The Last Starfighter, Stu Phillips did the soundtracks for Buck Rogers in the 25th Century and the original Battlestar Galactica. Again, kind of that exciting orchestral music, the same as you would find in the John Williams Lost in Space soundtrack from the first episode. The soundtracks go downhill after the first episode, but John Williams did the music for the first one, The Reluctant Stowaway, and it's fantastic. Christopher Lennertz did the soundtrack for the Lost in Space Netflix series, and that's really good. So there's a lot of the orchestral stuff, Star Crash and The Black Hole by John Barry. And then I'm like, okay, that kind of covers that sweeping orchestral stuff. Let's maybe kind of transition to some of the stranger stuff, more of the kind of electronica. I found Zardoz, the unofficial soundtrack by Castle If. And no matter whether you like the movie or not, and I think the movie is a good think piece, the music for it is really good and kind of captures that weird alien synth feel that I kind of vibed from the Barnard Starr portion. Dudley Simpson's The Theme to the Tomorrow People, if you're familiar with the classic British sci-fi show, that went really well. I used Charlie Harris's Clockwork Orange theme, which again has kind of that almost like orchestral synth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, the soundtrack to Space 99 Season 1, not Season 2. Not Season 2 at all. Season 1 by Barry Gray. And
there's a moon theme there too with the story. You can just
oh yeah. And then I also had two kind of sets of Disney music, actually. The supplemental music from Space Mountain by Andrew Valentino, which is like Starbase Alpha, Starbase Delta. It's very kind of soft, but still kind of drifting. And then the Tomorrowland music loop from Disney, which is about a 25-minute set piece that it goes through a couple different musical movements. All fantastic stuff. I found myself listening to the thing again all day today. I was doing tax work today while listening to this particular playlist, so I'm really pleased with it. And I see Roll for Success mentioning the score for Space Above and Beyond. My God, was that a good show! That you were saying that Battle Beyond the Stars was a deep cut. Roll for Success? No, Space Above and Beyond doesn't get nearly enough love. Most people don't even know what you're talking about. I loved that show. But yes, so that was my my playlist. So let's see how approachable this book really was with Keeper Mark's word of the day.
Oh yeah, as Jen mentioned, this is something that where you're not going to find like a lot of language barrier in terms of the reading. It's very light, very descriptive though, and I think that's something that is very rich in the book. There are a few words that I found that I thought were worth calling out. There's Fetor, it's kind of described as the alien Medusae, or have this kind of stench about them. Supernal is always a great word. It's another sort of Jack Vance, word that I always remember from the DCC Dying Earth stuff. Gibbering, is a fun word, just from a that it seemed like it was probably more popular at the time, and Lovecraft obviously overused it quite a bit, but that's certainly something I enjoyed seeing. Laconically, that was how Jay was described. He's kind of this very much a pragmatist, and speaks in very brief sentences. I didn't know that the origin of the word laconically was actually based on the Laconians from ancient Greece, and that was something that at least OED told me, and I was kind of curious about. Ophidian, which is a reptile or snake, and I think I was describing one of the creatures that you guys were talking about. It's kind of snake-like creature. I love that word, Ophidian. That was probably my runner-up for the word of the day, because what I came across as it's a chevaux de frise, and I had not heard that anymore, either before, but chevaux de frise isn't like an abatement of, sticks and pikes, that basically are meant to put a barrier between, creatures or militia and horses, cavalry that are charging. And I just was looking at that chevaux de frise. I know what a horse is in French. I know chevaux, but what is de frise? And it's a Frisian horse, is what it's, the origin of that word is. And it's, apparently, the origin of it is related to, these kind of Frisian horsemen who, had these, great robust horses, and this sort of like barrier, in engagement terms was, defensive, thing that was done in the time. But I like that word quite a bit. It doesn't really have a context for, fantasy settings necessarily, because then you get sort of that, where is the language coming from? But that was a very rare one, and it sort of is, I think, one of the records for one of the most obscure words in the English language, at least, because it had an OED frequency band of 1, which is the very lowest you can get in terms of the number of times it's used. And you can see this sort of like, one nice thing about the OED is you can see the historical sort of over time, use of the word. And it has this big, great, curve that goes like this, it's like around like 1930 or 1940. And apparently it was much more well used.
After the age of, when we stopped using cavalrymen in war. Yeah. But I bet if you were in the OFD, it would be a lot more common, right?
A lot more common.
The OED.
Yeah. So my recommended word for fantasy authors and works is Ophidian, but if you like words, chevaux de frise is a great word to populate into your stories.
Mark, I'm gonna have to have you look it up in the OED band. I found Pickaback.
Pickaback.
He invited Alidori to climb on and travel Pickaback.
I thought I just missed it. I think I breezed over that. I thought it was piggyback, maybe, and I guess I just my eyes just sort of absorbed it.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of wonder if piggyback isn't just sort of the
exactly
the slide into.
Yep.
Yeah,
it originates with pickaback.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you guys go on. I'm gonna look this up.
All right. So while he looks that up, Jen, why don't you tell me about your inspirations and reskins?
Starcrawl, first of all. I think it's kind of a no-brainer. I'll rip through mine pretty quick. Danger in the Air, the free RPG Day mod from 2022, I believe.
You like climbing inside the Medusa?
It would be, and it could also hold. You could transform a bit of that to be more like the creepy Medusa ship. I was really, really struck by Empire of the East, the Demon Key. It's the module on the inside of the hardcover setting. Not only do you get a MacGuffin similar to the AKKA, or ACA if you must, that if you find this and or activate this, it will save us all, sort of thing. But you're immediately thrown in against the satrap's forces. So you have that political and kind of threatening circumstance at you right in the beginning. And you're fending them off in essentially tunnels as you're winding down into the stepwell. And it just reminded me so strongly of the expanded amount of time that this party was stuck in the air vents. Completely dark, unable to see everything.
Fair. Totally fair.
Yeah. It was one of my favorites to run during the online cons in 2021, I believe. I ran it like 8 times. DCC Dying Earth, okay, yeah, the Fading Red Sun, we mentioned that. But specifically, adventure number 5, the Penumbra of the Polar Ape, where you are on an alien planet. You have maybe the most basic idea of geography, and you are taken for quite an adventure. I could wholeheartedly see some of these locales being swapped out or just slightly camouflaged a bit more, and you could totally play this adventure on that one. The last one on my little list is MCC number 10, which is Seeking the Posthumans. It's the one that Brendan wrote that's a little bit more Bronze Age. And, oh man, if you had those flying creatures there, you could make the most beautiful wings and impress everybody with some of the tasks that you need to take on in there. So that's my quick little list. I could have gone on longer, but I see that you guys have covered a few of mine. So a few of them that I had in mind.
Well, let's swing back to Mark and see if he has found Pickaback at the OED.
Yeah, it's an alternate form of piggyback, as we suspected. It's an earlier use of it. It seems to be related to pick is like it's a pitchfork. When you use a pitchfork, you can call it picking something, and so that's probably where that part of the etymology came from, as the speculation in the OED. And so you pitch something onto your back, pick a back. So.
And it is the earlier form then. It's an alternate to piggyback, but it's earlier. Hey, we pegged it. All right.
That's great. Thanks, Jen, for pointing that out. My eyes just glazed over that and didn't catch
All
it.
this covered live. I love it.
Okay. So Mark, what sort of inspirations did you find?
Well, of course, this just screams Purple Planet, right? There's so much about this, from the fact that they have to journey through this 1,000-mile plateau, and there's the ancestor peaks that they have to climb over, which is pretty breezy in the book. It's like, oh, and we made it across the giant mountain. But I mean, there's so much of this that's like the terror of what the unknown is, right, on this alien world, that fits right in the Purple Planet setting. And you could easily reskin the Purple Planet to be this Green Legion trek that's across the planet of the Medusae, complete with the red sun and all these kind of weird elements. And so I think that would be something that, if you're one to play in the Legion of Space world, the Purple Planet is a great launching point for that. I wanted to call out, I think I do a lot of times, but Tim Callahan's excellent zine Crawljammer, which is one of the earlier zines, and it has a lot of great space themed classes and adventures and effects. He's got rules in there for ship battles, in terms of using hull dice instead of hit dice, and how that works. And so I think you could easily map some of that stuff, or take that to recreate, the chase scenes in that happen in the book, and make that an element of it from a role-playing stance. But yeah, check out the Crawljammer if you haven't. It's like I said, one of the earlier zines in the DCC RPG that very influential on me, certainly, and I know other folks are really fond of it as well. And then of course, what's that?
Races in there too, right?
Yeah, he does. He's got alien races. I can't remember the name of it. Some sort of fly creature that's based on, I think, the old Atari game, Yar's
Revenge.
Yar's Revenge, yeah. Which I always thought was kind of a funny, player character that you could do in there. And he's got robots and psionics, and all sorts of fun stuff.
I would love to see a Crawljammer compendium.
Oh, I would too. Yeah, I don't know if Tim is interested in compiling that, but I think it would be great to have it all bound, in one single book. I think there were 6 issues. Maybe I missed one later ones, but I know 6 that came out originally. So then the last ones I had, and we've already talked about this, but Black Sun Deathcrawl, by Alpha Mill Publishing. This is this very evocative of, like you said, the Medusae are their dying world, and you could easily put the Legion in this sort of, they have to escape, and this is one of the harrowing things they do, is using the framework of Black Sun Deathcrawl, hopefully to a better end than what the characters experience in Black Sun Deathcrawl. But it does have that feeling of impossibility that the book can continuously conveys over and over again. Like, there are just these impossible situations until somebody has the idea, some player, in the case of the RPG, has the moment where they say, what if we did this or took this approach, and it's just the right thing to to save, the party, and that happens all the time, in the Legion book. But I think that's something that you could use this as a way of like really putting harrowing circumstances, together for the players. And similarly, there's also the Null Singularity by Stephen Bean Games, which is built off of or inspired by Black Sun Deathcrawl, but it's the space version of it. So those two combined, I think, would be a good resource for sort of the things that are thrown against the Legion characters that they have to overcome, and they are so desperate to do that. They're driven by their love for humanity and love for the Aladori, that it makes them push through against all odds. So.
Well, I'm just a huge fan. Black Sun Deathcrawl, Black Sun Deathcrawl.
Yes.
Black Sun Deathcrawl. Well, it's a great adventure. It's really dark.
Yeah. George is he just knocked out of the park with that one.
So right off the bat, I started thinking about Mutant Crawl Classics in general, because it provides a lot of great material for an alien world. All the various mutations, you could just use those to build your aliens. And then, of course, there's all sorts of sci-fi weapon stats. So maybe build from MCC as opposed to DCC might give you a good starting point. But adventure-wise, I was thinking, I actually thought of two adventures by Edgar Johnson. The first is DCC 87 Against the Atomic Overlord. Just replace the Overlord's magic with science, and it's perfect. You've got a spacefaring party that find themselves amidst the ruins of this once great civilization. It's there. I mean, it's a 30-second reskin and you're good to go. Then DCC 93, Moon Slaves of the Cannibal Kingdom, again by Edgar Johnson. It's described as in being in a place that is beyond civilization, and again, a great starting point for spacefarers trapped on an alien world, just like when they landed on Barnard's, at the planet at Barnard's Star. It leads more space fantasy than space opera, but you can certainly blend that in. And then lastly, since we've been doing a few deep cuts this episode, Operation Jakara, which is free inside Sanctum Companion number 16. Jeez. It was inspired by the space opera of Lee Brackett, and you can reskin the provided PCs. They're members of the Bureau of Interworld Cultural Relations, and you can reskin them into members of the Space Legion, a little weapon reskinning, and you're good to go. So I'll even drop the link into the chat there. What was that, Jim?
Was that a Dave Beatty one?
No, actually, no. I wrote that
one. Well, I knew it had to be one of the two of you because it wasn't me. That early, we were still pretty much encapsulated. So.
But yeah. So and hey, it's a space opera style adventure, and that is going to bring us to our DCC feature for the show. Gunzo, Operation Bug Hunt by Eric Bloat with additional material by James Spahn. Hey, Jen, tell us about it.
Suit up, Marine. These bugs ain't gonna kill themselves. Play as a combat medic, engineer, grunt, pilot, or robot as you travel from galaxy to galaxy, ridding the universe of the bugs. Also included are roles for cybermetrics. No, cybernetics. Sorry, bad font. Pressure and shell shock, and random bug generation, armor, items, ranged and melee weapons, boss monsters, and more. Boss monsters! That was possibly my favorite part.
Bob, this one is, I've never heard of this one. Thank you for finding it. It's really great. Really fits into the space opera / over the top Gonzo theme. So very good pick.
It's first of all, I mean, some people might refer to it as a zine, but really it's a nicely, slickly put together book. It's
full color.
It's full color. It's got some great art, and yes, it is a setting rather than an adventure, but it provides great potential for space opera as well as gritty military sci-fi. I mean, obviously, it is meant to be more like Aliens or Starship Troopers, right?
Exactly. More
But
Highlander, yeah.
but when I started really looking into it, and I was looking at the classes, I'm like, well, here are the characters. John Olnar is a pilot. Hal's an engineer. Giles is a grunt. And Jay Calum is a robot with just a little bit of modifications.
Giles would be the engineer.
Did I get that backwards?
Yeah, that's okay. We're here for you.
You're here for me? Well, I appreciate that.
But yeah, Callum would be a robot, or the
No, Giles is the engineer.
Okay.
But
right, we're here.
But yeah, I mean, you just make a few tweaks to the robot class, including maybe making it not actually a robot, and that's perfect for Jay. And there's the like
After all the damage he took, he probably needs some cybernetics at this point.
Yeah,
okay.
the level advancement titles is a great rank system, so it already works with something like the Space Legion. And
although I don't know, you have to be like level 9 to become a captain. That seems like gonna take a while.
Well, of course, there's also battlefield commissions, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Rules for battlefield commissions.
And the random bug generator, you could easily use that to create the horrors of like Barnard Star and other things. Yes, it's technically a bug generator, but if you just sort of take away the word bug and you leave the powers, like, breathes lava, like, what? No! No! And so there's a lot of weird and kind of alien things. And the entire book is really meant for you to be able to roll up characters, and as long as the judge has a few ideas of how he wants the night to go, you can drop your team in and you can just be generating the monsters on the fly if you need to, and as they move towards kind of a final boss battle, since there are boss monsters. Not to be confused with the game Boss Monster. But yeah, it's really easy to pick up. It's really easy to play. I want more stuff in this Gunzo Operation Bug Hunt sort of setting. And yeah, like I said, I was in love with it, and it's so easy to just tweak it here and there and make it space opera as opposed to space militant. So it is a fantastic buy for the money, and I think you're gonna love it. What about you, Mark?
The thing I think it's got great elements of like putting together space adventure. I love the classes. It's got a lot of monsters that you can pull from just for your adventures. I really appreciated the shock table as this kind of like alternative, effect driven, madness, elements that comes from seeing way too much things that are a shock to the system. And so there's kind of a fun table in the booklet, just basically like some of the effects, and I'm just trying to get to it. But yeah, pressure and shock. Basically, anytime you have these kind of like pressure situations, you have to roll against your personality, and if you fail that, then under your current pressure value, you get to roll a d10 on the shock table. You gain like permanent ticks or trembles, your mind shuts down and you enter a coma-like state. It's very much like the kind of insanity rules for games like Call of Cthulhu and things like that. But I love this kind of like, gritty sort of, realism, element to this in the setting. But there's
grit. It's like the grit from Weird Frontiers.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that there's some fun concepts in here, but also just it's such a homage to the things I grew up with, in terms of space fantasy and adventures with Alien and Starship Troopers, and it's a fun setting, that I think you could do a lot with, just in terms of making your own operatic, space adventures from it. So yeah, again, thanks, Bob, for pointing this one out. I had not heard of it before.
envy the people who read this as kids. Pretty much all of Appendix N. I feel like I really missed out on the entire genre as I was growing up. So it's been a lot of fun to dive into these.
Well, folks, GaryCon's almost upon us, and we at the Sanctum Secorum have been busy. So what is everybody's GaryCon's plans? Mark, what are you doing?
Well, I'll be at GaryCon. I'll also be at Founders and Legends this weekend. So one of them I'm going solo with the intent to play in games and maybe run a game or two. And then the weekend after that, I'm going with the family to GaryCon. We've enjoyed that as a trip for the past couple of years as a family vacation. And so really excited that we'll get to meet friends again and hopefully see some folks that appreciate DCC RPG, and happy to talk to anybody who wants to speak about Dying Earth. That's if they ever had any questions about it. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to GaryCon. And also looking forward to Founders Legends the weekend before. What about you, Bob and Jen?
Go ahead, Bob.
I'm gonna be at Founders and Legends playing. So if you run a game, Mark, let me know, because I think I did manage to get into like one DCC game for Founders and Legends, and then at GaryCon I'm going to be running the final playtest sessions for Beneath the Isle of Serpents, which is a Caverns of Thracia adjacent adventure that I've been playtesting. And so I'm really excited about that. And of course, I'm looking forward to playing and seeing everybody. And Jen, anything cool about the booth you could tell us?
Well, not so much the booth, but I can guarantee that the foam ziggurat will be making an appearance at GaryCon. For the booth itself, I mean, yes, I'll be there. That's pretty cool, isn't it? At the risk of blending in the real job with this, yeah, I'll be there. I should also mention that I think I will be. I don't think James will be there either. I think I'll be the only one for Spellburn that'll be there as well. So look for me in the forum over at the Goodman Games booth.
Julian will be there. He's running some games.
Julian?
Yeah, he's running some games
I thought
this
he
year.
wasn't able to make it this year. Okay.
I think
Maybe I'm
I
missing.
saw his name on the list of hosts for the schedule, but
Cool. Even better. So go bug Julian and go bug Mark and Bob if you have questions about podcasts in general. And I believe Spellburn's on Monday night right before I leave for Lake Geneva. That'll be fun. And I will be at the booth if you have any questions or needs, or just want to hand me credit cards. That's cool too.
All right. Meanwhile, we're about to release, let's see if I can get this right this time, India Muhachi. India Muhachi. That is right. I got it. It is the latest creation of Ashraf Braden. It deals with a dark spirit that leads a young man to eat his own eye.
Yes, you heard that correctly.
So the folklore is dark and creepy, and it comes with the dark spirit itself as well as a curse. So look for that in the next couple of days. And what we'll be reading next month, we're reading the first of the Carson of Venus stories, Pirates of Venus by Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Another I've always been meaning to pick up. Awesome.
Right?
maybe we'll find out what Venusian jungle fever
is. Yeah, right, maybe.
I asked for that. Okay.
If you're enjoying the show, please comment on the podcast or help us by posting a review on iTunes or on YouTube. Those ratings, reviews, and comments all help new listeners find the podcast and also helps them find our community. Any last thoughts, Mark, Jen?
I would just say that, yeah, this is a wonderful book and one of the ones I really enjoyed. And it's certainly a gem, going back, how far back it was written. And like you said, Jen, it doesn't have a lot of the kind of the, approachability characteristics that we're sometimes worried about with these older stories. So,
Anything from you, Jen?
Read more, and we'll see you at GaryCon.
And there you have it. We do indeed hope to see you at GaryCon. Thanks for listening, and be inspired. Good night, everybody.
Good
good
night.
night.